As mentioned tonight, I thought it'd be lovely for our first class of 2024 to turn our attention towards a type of self-care in the practice of self-compassion. So often in Buddha Dharma and so often in what I share in my own imperfect way in these teachings, in these classes and retreats, we're focused on compassion for all beings, compassion for others, looking to cultivate wisdom, less automatic judgment when we don't care for something, maybe attempting to see the points of view and the fact that when any of us, including all the lovely folks in this room, and certainly including me, when we behave poorly in our body, speech, or mind, it's motivated by the poisons in Buddha Dharma's sense of either greed, selfishness, or anger, or irritation, or aversion, or ignorance. And the true meaning of the word ignorance is we don't know better. We're misunderstanding. We aren't clear. Clear on what? Clear on that which leads away from suffering. Let me repeat that one. Clear on that which leads away from suffering. We may believe that, I don't know, grab something here from the scary regions of my imagination. We might believe that smoking 3 packs of cigarettes tonight is going to make us feel better. And there may be some actual data that when any of us consume certain substances, it can have a good dopamine hit and it might temporarily feel better. But there's a level of ignorance there, and I'm not being anti-smoking here, although health's helpful, support it. But I'm making a point, we can substitute a chocolate bar, we can substitute going to binge Netflix when you get home, even going to the gym and exercising. But when we're reaching for something to make us feel better, when we're ignorant that this making us feel better, and these things often do, right? Flopping on the couch, ideally with a cat or a dog, my bias there, and a sweet person you love maybe, and watching an interesting program feels good. And I'm not saying any of us should cease doing it, but I want to point to the larger issue around suffering and the cessation of suffering. That when we're reaching for something or an experience, cigarette, a hug, more money to make us feel happy, we're very vulnerable because, of course, things end or go away or die, or how long can you binge watch one show before you're restless and want something else? So I went on that little riff around this idea of ignorance, that ignorance is literally not knowing better and believing this will soothe me, and it may temporarily, but the bigger confusion, the bigger ignorance there is that it's the answer to run from shiny object to shiny object to shiny object. Cool experience to cool experience to cool experience. That's a very vulnerable way to live, because as you're hearing and as you know from your own experience, certainly don't take my word for it, maybe don't even take the Buddha's word for it. Take the word, the experience of your life. Does any object, love affair, cigarette, piece of chocolate keep you happy forever? No, that's silly. No, it doesn't forever. And yet we act unconsciously often as though reaching for something is the answer. So greed, hatred, and delusion. When we're attempting to have compassion for someone else who may have radically different views than us, views we may find offensive, that are unwholesome, that lead to harm for beings. I'm not saying we condone that, accept it, but can we look at the ignorance behind that? And that might soften our heart to have a bit more wisdom and understanding of others. And if you're ever going to reach a compromise with others, different political views or etc., it must start with understanding the other person's point of view, even if you don't agree with it. So just a little bit of introduction around the theme for tonight, which is self-compassion. I wanted to start that way, talking about how we might perceive other, right? And when we're in our self-righteous stuff, which I can get into too, no blame or shame here, just curiosity, I hope, your binoculars and your thicket looking for stuff, is, oh, how could that person think that? What's wrong with them? If they have, like, pick a view, I'm sure I could name a few that everybody in this room would go, yeah, I don't agree with that. So pick one. I won't pick it for you tonight. and think, how can someone think that or act that way or do that behavior? Think of your politics. Think of your feelings about animal rights, child trafficking. Pick one. Pretty hard to have any compassion for that person. When you remember that person is driven by the same greed, hatred, delusion threads that are in all of us, unless you're a fully awake Buddha, and I'm not, there can be at least an inkling of what pain and suffering that person must be in to be behaving that way. And I'll quote someone far wiser than probably all of us, but certainly me, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And it's quite an oft quoted vignette or story of, at some point in the last few decades, a reporter asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama how he felt about the Chinese soldiers in the invasion of Tibet in 1956, where there was some atrocities committed, as every race, every country, and every identity has at times committed atrocities towards others, tribal stuff, etc. But in this case, he was asked, Chinese soldiers who maybe killed monks or abused monks or raped nuns or hurt civilians. How do you feel about these people? And rather famously, and something to aspire to, the Dalai Lama said, I feel tremendous compassion. Tremendous compassion. The amount of suffering in the mind for any of us to do these acts, I have great compassion for the suffering of that, to oversimplify Chinese soldier. That's what we can aspire to, that level of compassion. Be careful here. I know you're all too wise to make this mistake probably, but it bears to say it to ourselves. This doesn't mean we condone the behavior. The behavior out of greed, hatred, delusion can be entirely unacceptable. That's where in the Tibetan teaching, wrathful compassion comes in, which is I have compassion for the person who's conducting this terrible act because they are suffering. I will stop the act. I will stop the harm that defiled state is causing. Can you do that in your own home? How good at you are stopping the harm you're causing in your defiled state when you're angry at your roommate or hurt, frustrated with your partner, your lover, or pissed off at your mother or your child. You're human. These things happen. How good are you at noticing the defiled state in your own mind and hopefully not acting out of it? Some of you, a fair number of you, but maybe not all of you know that part of my main work I do is I work with couples. I have an international online couples program. I teach about 100 couples at a time. A program that's similar to couples therapy and different. So boy, do I get to work with all sorts of beautiful beings, including me and my spouse, around, defiled mental state and lashing out, saying something unkind, being critical, being nasty or worse. So it's, I think, very helpful to remind ourselves of the common humanity of when we're judging someone with inexplicable behavior, that it's a variation, maybe a big roaring forest fire version of our own bonfires. So that can help us lessen the judgment of that is a bad person to that is a destructive behavior driven by a painful, awful mind state. And I'm going to step in the way and prevent the destructive behavior if I can. Do you hear the difference? It's not hate-based, it's compassion-based. It's not, look at this a-hole that I'm going to beat up. It's, let me stop this person punishing himself and any other persons around them. Wrathful compassion is tough. Wrathful compassion might have a sword, but that sword's not going to be driven through that person's heart. It's going to be used to cut down the delusion around them, metaphorically. So maybe they can see the light. So there's a preamble. I didn't intend giving, but there you go. To lead us into this talk of a short talk-ish about self-compassion. And as said, about half of you in the room were at that beautiful retreat that we had where we spent 3 days working with this. And Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, is a PhD psychologist researcher out of Berkeley, who then moved to, I think, University of Texas as a professor. And her research is on compassion and self-compassion. So a great deal of what I'm going to share tonight is from the perspective of her work. And I strongly encourage you to check her work out. The easiest way is selfcompassion.org is her website. Or if you simply remember the word Neff, kind of an unusual word, her last name, that'll also get you there. If you just Google self-compassion, you'll almost entirely in the first few hits see her website. Some of what I'm going to share tonight is drawn quite extensively from that. Usually that's not how I teach, but she says it better than I, and did beautiful research, and is a wonderful teacher. She has 2 books as well on self-compassion, and her newest book is, I think, called, she has a different name for it, not radical, not fierce. Anybody know? Fierce, thank you. Her second book is Fierce Self-Compassion, which is a bit this latter part that I was talking about. Okay, get to the good, Cheryl. I will. First, a quote. Oh, yeah, and then an image. The quote, this is from Byron Katie. It's not your job to like me, it's mine. It's not your job to like me, it's mine. Because I introduced tonight this idea of compassion for others because probably some of you here and online are guilty of having more compassion for your friends or neutral people than you do for yourself. So here's a scenario any of us could run into any day. Friend, roommate, brother, sister, coworker, someone who you feel some affection towards, some kindness towards. You don't have a big, difficult history with them for this example, is really struggling with something. They got fired because they made some mindless mistakes more than once. Maybe they didn't take feedback on how to correct their work and they got fired. Or they made a big mistake, they're renovating their bathroom and they did the plumbing wrong and it flooded the place. You know, something that they're pretty upset about. And you say, how you doing, friend? And they say, oh, just really blew it. I got fired and it's my fault. I made these mistakes and the supervisor brought it to my attention a couple times and I kind of didn't take it seriously enough and now I've really blown it. Or, you know, I was trying to DIY it and YouTube videos were great, but I flooded the house and I feel terrible. And then they went on a bit of a trip, as we do, about what an idiot I am, or I really blew it, or, you know, why would anyone want to hire me again? Your feelings would be what? You're all pretty nice people. You'd feel some compassion for your friend. And you might say something like, wow, John, Jane, him, he, they, you. That sounds tough, and I'm really sorry that happened. You're not an idiot, though. You made some mistakes, it sounds like you're owning them. And it sounds like it's a learning curve, right, buddy? But you know, when I hear you say you're stupid or you're useless or you're such an idiot, that's not true. You're human, bud. We all mess up sometimes. And maybe you would choose to share a story of when you made a big mistake and say, you know, don't think you're the only one. Boy, once in one of my jobs I did X, Y, Z, and so I feel you. And I also want you to know that you're not perfect. What you choose to do with this is important. Do you choose to learn? Do you choose to grow? Right? Because you're all lovely people. I bet you'd be quite nice to your friend that was struggling. And notice the language I'm using. I'm not letting them off the hook, because that's what we do a lot in this society, it seems, at least on Facebook. Would be more on the lines of, your boss is a jerk. Oh, you, what a vendetta. They're toxic. Please don't get me started on toxic, narcissist, or gaslighting. I'm a psychologist. Those are not happening to all of you all the time. For another day. I'm going to do some podcasts on busting the myths of gaslighting, toxic, and narcissism. About 1% of the population is narcissist, but on Facebook, everybody but me is. Which is pretty narcissistic, isn't it? Thank you for having some, at least the courtesy to pretend to tolerate that little diatribe. I appreciate it. But the point is there, which is generally a lot of us would be more kind to our friend around their suffering. And we wouldn't say, I hope, oh, your boss is toxic and they're gaslighting you and they're a narcissist. We might say, sounds like you blew it. We all blow it sometimes. I admire you for admitting it. That's strong. Gives you a place to grow. But please don't think you're a worthless piece of whatever. Now let's put yourself in the same scenario. You get fired because you made some mistakes, you were given some feedback, you didn't take it in very well or make good corrections, and you got fired. It's a big deal. Or you did the DIY plumbing project and you flooded the house, and maybe your insurance isn't going to cover it because you're not a registered plumber. Ouch, that would be rotten. I wouldn't like it if that happened to me. You wouldn't like it if it happened to you. But would you be as kind in your story to yourself? I don't think so. I doubt most of us automatically bring the kind of compassion and grace we might bring to a friend who's made a mistake or is struggling. It'd be more like, I really am an idiot and I should have known. And a lot of self-abuse, self-criticism, self-nastiness. If this isn't yours, great. If you've cultivated the ability that we're talking about to be more compassionate than that to yourself, wonderful. Keep it going. So some of the ways Kristen Neff and some others talk about self-compassion. First, I'll define, in case it's helpful for anybody. Many of you have heard this quite a bit before, but what is compassion? The English and psychological terms are pretty darn similar to the Dharma explanation. We can almost blend them here. But compassion is, first of all, the ability to notice suffering. Can't feel compassionate if we don't notice. To notice suffering. For example, we just went through the holiday season, and there was a bit of a cold snap somewhere there in December, and you may have been out grocery shopping or doing your things, and there may have been an unhomed person sitting on the cold cement, perhaps with a cup for donations, or just sitting with their dog or their belongings. First, you have to notice that there's some suffering there. And sometimes we do, and sometimes perhaps we don't. Sometimes perhaps we see, which is a noticing, but then we turn away. You're all human. This is not blame or shame. But you need to notice the suffering. And then you need to be moved by the suffering in order for compassion to arise. 3 steps. Notice, be moved by, and be moved to do something to reduce the suffering. So back to an all too frequent sight in our warmest climate in Canada, someone who doesn't have a home on the street, you walk, you see, that's noticing. And then sometimes we might be moved by, other times we might keep going, not because necessarily we're uncaring, but because there's a lot of suffering in the world. And there may be times where one might feel the need to close one's heart, acknowledge that, see the suffering, but not really let it in, to be moved by it. And sometimes that can be moderately healthy to protect your heart. I'll use an example. Some of you have probably also traveled to India or Africa. The first time I was in Delhi, it's actually Calcutta. Calcutta, I landed out on the streets of a busy Indian city a couple decades ago in a Dharma bum, and seeing crippled children and persons without limbs and dead bodies in the streets and people walking around them. I worked with a concept of how can I try to keep my heart open around so much overt suffering, right? So we need to notice the being in this example, and for compassion to arise, we be moved by the suffering. We feel a sense of maybe common humanity, connectedness, sadness, or movement in the heart that this being appears to be cold, maybe hungry, and that's suffering. And then to be moved to do something to relieve the suffering. Now, we could be literal here and say maybe to give someone a blanket or a coat, or to go and buy a sandwich and a hot chocolate and bring them out. Maybe to sit and have a conversation. How are you, friend? It's cold tonight. Are you all right? So 3 aspects to compassion is to notice suffering, to be moved by suffering, and be moved to alleviate suffering. Now, what about self-compassion? Well, guess what? It's the same 3 steps. If I, Cheryl, am suffering, I may or may not be overtly aware of it, right? Don't you find sometimes you're going through your day and your life and your events, and you're not really aware? Maybe later you become aware that there's some low-grade sadness, or maybe not so low-grade, or low-grade anxiety, or not so low-grade. For self-compassion, first we need to notice that there is some suffering. Really missing my grandma this holiday season, my dad, or whoever. There's some sadness. So noticing that there's some suffering or discontent or unsatisfactoriness present. These are different translations of the word dukkha. It's usually translated as suffering, but it can also be just subtle discomfort. So noticing Cheryl is feeling some sadness or some sadness present, let's say. And then what's the next one? To notice, to feel some empathy for it, to be moved by the suffering. Now, some of us might fall down there when it's our suffering. Oh, there's sadness. Oh, get over it, Cheryl. Buck up. But you may or may not be moved by the suffering. So maybe that's what you need to work on a bit. I'm going to talk about the difference between self-compassion and self-indulgence or self-pity in a minute. We're not talking about those. So it'd be, there's anxiety present, there's sadness present, so I notice, this is tough. So there's some empathy, there's some being moved by the suffering in my own being. And then the next step would be to be moved to alleviate that suffering. Now it gets tricky, because you can say, well, is that where you grab a cigarette or a Netflix or a chocolate bar? Maybe, no judgment. But let's add a word, wise, to be moved to wisely do something to alleviate the suffering. That might be what you're about to learn, self-compassion practice. So, just to give all of this context. So I'd like to talk about, because I think it's so terrific, and this is beautifully explained by Kristen Neff. What's the difference between self-indulgence, or self-pity maybe, and self-compassion? Because some of us worry, well, if I'm like, oh, there's suffering present and this is tough, I might just indulge or say, therefore I don't have to go to work, or therefore I'm not going to be there for my family, or etc. Sometimes those can be wise, compassionate choices. But let's hear some wisdom about the difference between self-indulgence and self-compassion. Some people say, well, I'm afraid if I acknowledge the suffering, I'll just eat chips and drink Coca-Cola and watch TV. Like I'll give in to kind of being sluggish or unwholesome. So it's better I just say, yeah, not feeling good, but carry on. Or self-indulgence is more temporary hits. That's how I set things up tonight. These reaching for things to feel better. Cigarette, sugar, checking your phone on retreat, much to the chagrin of your teacher. Because it ruins your mind state. You gotta start over again. You're like, not me. Oh, I've never done that. Looking suspiciously too innocent in front of me. Afraid to face the difficult truths. So we run away from them. Or we're afraid, and this is very natural, don't judge yourself if this one resonates. We're afraid if we really acknowledge the struggle, the suffering, we might spiral into despair, overwhelm, panic, grief. So conversely, cousins, but not very close cousins, self-compassion is to know that right now a rest would be wholesome. It's not self-indulgent. It's not avoiding life. There's a difference between those two. And the better you get at this, you can learn to feel, I find, a qualitative difference between self-indulgence and kind of spoiling yourself and actually compassionate rest. For example, like almost all of you, or all of you, I'm sure, I work pretty hard some of the time. I just put into 10-hour straight days planning a whole bunch of stuff for the business. It's been fun, it's been stimulating, but holy smokes, it was a lot of work. And when I get home tomorrow, whenever, I'll probably choose to have a day where I just am very restful. I might watch 2 movies. I might lay on the couch and read a book. And I've learned over the years, for the most part, the difference between healthy self-compassion on a rest day without any guilt, and when I'm feeling more a little lazy and resistant and would like to take the day off and lay on the couch and watch movies. They suddenly feel different. One of them is self-indulgent, the second one, the first one is self-compassion and wisdom. When you can look at, witness, I keep rubbing my heart, right? Because often this is where, how is this being called Cheryl? What is present? We bring mindfulness to see what's present. And if it's a bit difficult or sometimes almost overwhelmingly painful, the first step is to notice, as you've heard. The second is to be moved by that suffering, even though it's just mine. And the third is to be moved to do something about it. So, overview and context. Which brings us to this beautiful practice of self-compassion. the way she defines it. And I've introduced part of it already, but not drawn it together. So that's my intent right now. So if any of us are going to practice self-compassion, which we're about to do, there are 3 steps in the way this beautiful, simple self-compassion practice. There's others and other variations from Kristen and from other people and teachers and from Dharma back to the Visuddhimagga, the original teachings of the Buddha. But for now, I'm going to go with her lovely languaging, which is to notice that suffering is present with kindness, with mindfulness, and to remind ourselves of our common humanity. I'll repeat those. So to notice, which is the mindfulness, become aware that there's some sort of suffering or difficulty present, unpleasantness. But to notice with kindness, right? Not the self-recrimination, the judgment, the fed up with myself, for goodness sakes, anxiety again. I thought I fixed that. You may have done great work and you may handle anxiety much better, and it may show up and plague you far less often. But you're likely not going to be anxiety-free for the rest of your life unless you become fully awake. So the 3 steps are to notice with mindfulness. So I mimic this a little bit, but let's say there's some anxiety present or stressfulness, feeling present, unpleasant. Whew. So there'd be a noticing. And I might mentally say, anxiety is present. Mindfulness, without judging. Oh, for goodness sakes. Anxiety is present. And with then kindness. So mindfulness, kindness, common humanity. Mindfulness. I might go deeper. What does it feel like? There's a tightness in the chest. There's a fluttery, uncomfortable feeling in the belly. There's a sort of a sense of discomfort or dread in the mind. So there's a mindful attention. But mindfulness describes what the direct experience is without a story, right? So there's the direct experience. But with kindness. Kindness is where we're kind to ourselves. I know it's a stretch sometimes for some of us. And the next mental sentences might be something like, oh, this hurts. It's kind to recognize that this hurts. It's tough that this is happening right now. Can I be kind to the Cheryl that's struggling? Can I be kind to the state that is present? And you can use phrases like that. One of them I really like that someone uses is ow or ouch, right? Just sadness. I'll switch to sadness. Sadness is present. Ouch. That's the acknowledgement without judgment that this hurts in this moment. Might not in the next moment, remains to be seen. But the kindness around this is the direct experience in this moment, and it's painful. May I give kindness to the me that is feeling this. May I be gentle with the me that is struggling in this moment. And this third bit, common humanity, is so beautiful. So beautiful. I think it's her somewhat unique addition. Not really, there's interconnectedness of beings in Buddha Dharma, but the way she does it is so beautiful, which is we remind ourselves of our common humanity, which simply seems is in, I'll give it a couple different ways, but I'm not special or unique. Everyone struggles sometimes, right? Because so often it's, what an idiot, why can't I shake this? Why am I being sad about this again? As though we're uniquely broken, foolish, or wrong. And reminding ourselves of our common humanity does a lot of different things. It can take the judgment away, which is others also feel anxieties. Others also feel grief. All humans go through ups and downs in the mind. All humans have ebbs and flows between wholesome and unwholesome states, or whatever language you want to use. I'm using Buddha Dharma language. I am not alone is another really beautiful thing about reminding ourselves of our common humanity. Doesn't it often feel that you're alone in your pain? And with the judgment we can pile on then about how foolish or weak or dumb or we should be over this, we are, or broken, or this horrible self-talk, it also accentuates an incorrect sense of reality is incorrect, that we're alone and unconnected. We may feel very alone, by the way. You might be alone in your home where you live alone, bawling your eyes out, or curled up in a panic attack, and it sure as F feels alone. But when we remind ourselves of our common humanity, we're reminded that there are people in our world who do care about us. They may be skillful or unskillful at showing up in the way that would soothe us at the right time, but they care. We can remind ourselves that because X amount of millions of people right now are probably experiencing some sadness or anxiety co-occurring with this moment, we're not crazy, broken, or as alone as we think we are. And these can start to ease, not always, and it's not a linear put slot in A and B will happen. It's not, oh, I'll do a self-compassion practice and now I feel fine. It would be delightful if it was that automatic and easy. Sometimes it is, especially if you practice and cultivate this. But it's the practice of acknowledging the suffering, being kind to the suffering and the being, in this case you, experiencing it, and reminding oneself, we're not uniquely broken. This too shall pass. All beings struggle sometimes. I'm not alone. So let's practice that very simply right now. Place your hand on your heart center. Little bit, and two hands is beautiful too, whichever's most comfortable for you. And close your eyes and actually check in with your actual direct experience. You might be feeling quite calm and pleasant. Wonderful, then you'll work with that. But just notice with mindful curiosity what is present. And because there is a bit of unresolved work decisions, there is a little bit of a buzz in this body. So there is a touch of an anxiety-ish. So I would notice that. Oh, some buzzy, revved up, vaguely anxious feeling. And then as I've already mirrored, I might, and I want each of you right now mentally, to describe the direct experience to yourself. Tightness, looseness, warmth, calm, heaviness, sadness. And this is the bringing mindful direct awareness to the experience, the first. And then the part that may come less naturally is the kindness part. So spend a moment or two on those two parts, noticing and mentally describing or attending to the direct experience right now, in what we call in psychology in the West, our emotional experience perhaps. And then bring some kindness. And if you're at a bit of a loss, use some of the phrases I gave out. May I be kind to myself right now. May I be kind to the me that is feeling that. Or, ouch. Or, can I hold this without judging? And then the third piece, they don't have to come in any particular order, is the common humanity. So remind yourself here and now, I am not alone in this. Everyone feels some of these things some of the time. This is part of being alive. This is part of having a mind and a heart. Part of life is at times dukkha or struggle. Everything's temporary. This too shall pass. And probably to your relief, I'll stop talking for a few minutes, 2-3 minutes or so. Just explore this a little bit in your own direct experience right now. And this is, I think, elegantly taught as a self-compassion break. And you can do it in 60 seconds. So maybe you're in a challenging work meeting, or you're stuck in traffic and there's someone honking their horn inappropriately at you and it feels a bit stressful. You can just notice, be kind, remind yourself this too shall pass. It was less than a minute, right? What a difference might that make in our life if we did that once an hour? No one needs to know. I mean, if this might be perceived as a little odd, or people might say, "Are you okay? Is your heart okay?" Then you don't necessarily have to do that. It's really lovely to, though. The more you do, you'll probably notice more connection with the practice here. But you don't need to. You can be in a Zoom meeting where someone's really mad at someone else. It's quite uncomfortable. That didn't happen today, by the way. It's not a real event from today. You're thinking, ooh. But it certainly can happen, right? And you can just be and thinking, there's stressful feeling of worry present. This is tough. Can I be kind to the me that is feeling this? And can I remind myself, we're all human, including those two fools on the Zoom class. Oops, sorry, back to me. They're suffering. But honestly, you know, it's kind of, I find it a bit amusing, perhaps some of you do too, all the life hacks, right? Some of them are really good, like, you know, taking certain supplements or doing, you know, standing up every hour and stretching. Those are great life hacks to enhance your health or your well-being. But what about a self-compassion life hack? That's a great one to add it to your repertoire. You probably brush your teeth, do some self-compassion. Is that a question? Yes. Yeah.
I was just wondering about, you know, there's a range of emotions and a range of intensities. What about like the stronger, more intense? I'm thinking things like shame or guilt, or, you know, the really grief or bereavement loss.
Panic.
Yeah, like what?
Rage,
do you have
hatred.
any thoughts or comments to if it's really intense?
Yeah. I would this practice is very helpful. But thank you for the great question. I think everybody could hear it okay, so I won't repeat it. Two answers. One is, it kind of depends on the ballast of your practice or who you are as a being, whether, say, in panic or wrenching grief or triggered anger or rage, whether or not one could sit a little bit. Sometimes it's too overwhelming. Years ago, my first three-month retreat with Namgyal Rinpoche, I think I had panic attacks every night. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff clearing. It was not a lot of fun, but it was important. And I'd be like trying to sit in meditation when there was panic. I was in solo retreat, so there was no one else to disturb in the room based on what I did. I was in a cabin. But I talked to him about it. He said, go for a run, go for a walk, go for a hike, hug a tree. Like I said, when you've got that much biophysiological, panicky, anxiety, cortisol, adrenaline, at this time, he says, probably it's not going to be helpful to try to meditate through. Now, 23 years later, I could meditate through panic. So it's a skillful decision whether doing this, especially with anxiety, because anxiety is often here, and this can even be too much, and bringing attention can maybe make it worse. Then it might be, first of all, you could try lying down with your arms open, or lying down with a pillow on your chest to feel more protected, or go for a brisk walk and still do the practice, but not in stillness. A brisk walk, do some jumping jacks, but be utilizing those 3 steps of, there's this grief present. Can I be kind to the me that is grieving? This is very tough. Ouch. May I remind myself this too will pass. Everyone goes through grief. Everyone goes through loss. But potentially not with the stillness. Is that partly what you were wondering about?
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's skill and means, as the Buddha talks about, right? So you can take the concept and adapt it at times. When I went for brisk walks on that retreat in 2000, it helped settle some of the biophysiology of the panicky hormone and cortisol dump, and then I could practice alongside it. Sometimes it's not at all self-compassion to muscle through, right? And you hear, boy, how do you know? Well, you don't. You develop over time more wisdom when the enjoying a day on the couch watching movies and replenishing is wholesome, and when it's lazy and avoidant. And we hopefully start to learn just a subtle different feeling between those. When is it wise to so-called muscle through? I don't love that phrase there. When is that actually wise? To develop the ability to be with that suffering, witnessing, maybe moving on to being engulfed in it, to a bit more of a witnessing, engulfed, but then maybe into a little bit of Cheryl looking at and with the engulfment feeling, a little bit of separation. That kindness piece is critical. And then that reminder, that may help us learn to bear along with the biggies. And not drown in the engulfment, but I guess metaphorically be able to have our nostrils and then our whole head above it. And maybe start to get, we're only engulfed to the waist, so to speak. And then honestly, it can be compassionate and wise to say, enough. I'm going to distract myself for healthy reasons with a program or a call to a friend to chat about something benign and lovely, cuddle the cat. That isn't always avoidance and it's not always bad. This is the wisdom piece. When is it self-kindness to say, this is a bit much to be with right now? Better for me to actually go write that report that's due at work because it will distract me and take me out. If you're always running from it, you want to look at that. If you're diving in and drowning in it, you probably want to look at that too. Yeah. Does that help?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Are there other questions? I can't necessarily answer them skillfully, but I always take a stab. It's good. Good. Just want to check a couple more things I wanted to share. Oh, I meant to share this beautiful image. Some of you saw at the retreat. This is a beautiful image, I feel, for self-compassion. Our colleague and friend, one of our Island Dharma students, Cheryl Martin, who's often here, has had some schedule conflicts with our times lately. She's an artist, amongst other wonderful, amazing things. And she created this beautiful piece. And when I taught the retreat in December, I said to her, do you have something that would reflect self-compassion. And she sent me 5 gorgeous images, all of which would have been amazing. And I really liked this one. So we had copies made for everybody at the retreat. And I hope you look at it often. And to me, that's just, it's this beautiful equipoise meditation. Hands are at the heart. And to me, this is really about self as well as so many beautiful images are about other. The more we strengthen self with self-compassion and kindness, the more you can show up with more compassion for the world. Back to that example I used earlier this evening of an unhomed person in the cold. I live in Couch Valley, and a lot of you live here. When you're compassionate to self, when you're feeling fairly resilient, taking decent care of yourself, you're having a good mind state day, you're a lot more likely to be able to tolerate that second step, noticing, being moved by it, and maybe able to then do some small or large gesture of human kindness. That is a lot harder for all of us when we're burned out. Burned out being the older phrase and was replaced about a decade ago. I don't know if it's called something else these days. You'd have to go ask Facebook. But instead of Mark Zuckerberg probably doesn't like me. May he awaken swiftly with and for all beings, the way we hopefully all will. What was I saying? There was something about how, it's hard to be moved when you're burned out. And the phrase that replaced burnout for a while, I hope it's still in play, is compassion fatigue. Much better and more accurate phrase. Burned out is a scary phrase. I'm a psychologist. I think words matter. Our subconscious listens. If I'm burned out, what next? If I have compassion fatigue, it implies the possibility that with some rest from fatigue, we will replenish and have compassion again. So that's what I wanted to say there. Yeah. So that may be plenty for tonight. But I wanted to sprinkle these seeds for those of you for whom they're new, remind those of you, water the seeds in those of you that were at the retreat, and ask you, you don't have to answer, but answer for yourself. Are you starting your day with a self-compassion practice? We talked about that, laying in bed, waking up, so-called waking up, little W waking up, coming out of your so-called sleep into so-called awakeness. And what if you put your hand on your heart? First thing, laying there, even if you have to pee, and just take 30 seconds. Calmness and sleepiness is present. Pleasant, unpleasant. Maybe kind to this heart now and today. I remind myself, we all go through ups and downs. And there may be some ups and downs today. And that's okay. And then get up and be. What a way to start the day. So we talked about, a lot of you said your intention coming out of that retreat was to create a morning routine. How's that going? You don't have to answer it out loud, but answer it for yourself. Is it something that maybe you could use a little rebooting tomorrow morning? Great. There's no time like the present, because there is no time but the present. Literally. From physics, from neurocognition, from Dharma, there literally is no time but this present. So when would now be a good time to reboot a morning routine of 60 seconds or 60 minutes? But what a way to start the day. Instead of the way, I don't have these stats at the top of my head, one of you might, but something like 66% of North Americans, the first thing they do is check their phone in bed. Well, you can start your day that way if you want. Might be more wholesome ways to do it. So you suffer less and therefore can show up more for yourself and others. So we'll end with just a moment or two of silence, just allowing this evening to sink in. If there was anything that was helpful, take it with you. And remind yourself, maybe write a Post-it note when you get home and stick it on your toothbrush. Self-compassion. Because the world needs all of us. And the more we can fill our own bucket, to use a helpful ancient adage, the more we have to give to others. We close with the dedication of merit. By the merit of this strengthening activity of meditation and Dharma, may there be cessation of the defilements for all beings, the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion. And may we all be washed and filled with compassion and wisdom.